Okay, hello everybody. So glad you could join us today. We're looking forward to a fantastic webinar with some great insight and takeaways. And for today's session, Subhash and Manish from InfoCepts are going to be talking about real-time adaptation with a discussion about implementing managed analytics to stay ahead of the curve. It's a really timely discussion in today's landscape because whether we like it or not, we're dealing with an unprecedented increase in data in a rapidly changing technology landscape that creates a universal shortage of the right skills. And in addition to that, the current economic disruption and reduction in the workforce has only made matters much worse. So as a result, data and analytics leaders face challenges with controlling costs, supporting end users, and balancing today's operational needs with preparing for the future. So Subhash and Manish are going to show us how we can implement managed analytics to stay ahead of the curve. And as part of the session today, we're also going to hear about an excellent case study through a recording with Himanshu Jita. He's the VP of Applications at Stein Mart. And we are going to open this up for Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So feel free to submit any and all questions that you have throughout the webinar by utilizing the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen, and we'll be sure to get them in today. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Subhash and Manish now, and we can jump ahead right into the content. Subhash Kari is the Executive Vice President of Global Practices at InfoCepts and oversees their Center of Excellence around cloud, platforms, data, analytics, and adoption to strengthen the company's competency areas by focusing on talent, alliances, and innovation to meet the future needs of the customers. Runs the practices organization, bringing together experts from business, technology, and management to create offerings, enable marketing and sales, develop and retain customers, and enable delivery. Manish Sengar, he's the Chief Architect with the Global Practices at InfoCepts, and he works closely with strategic InfoCepts customers to define modernization roadmaps and architect complex data and analytics platforms and deliver critical transformation engagements, collaborating with senior technical architects from practices and delivery. And he's also the driving force behind InfoCepts Solutions Accelerators team that's responsible for creating industry-leading reusable solution accelerators. And his areas of expertise include cloud computing, information architecture, and intelligent automation. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get everything started here. Subhash, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah. Thank you, Bobby. I also wanted to just sort of introduce, just make note of like Himanshu, who is a customer. I think we have him on a video recording to sort of share the case study. So I appreciate his contribution as well. So Manish and I are very excited to share a point of view on how data analytic leaders can adapt to today's economy using the concept of managed analytics, some emerging trends, and some opportunities and recommendations for advancing your own journey. We base our point of view on the rich body of work that our company has done for the past 15 years, focused exclusively on data analytics. Both Manish and I draw upon our direct experiences in public as well as private sector and the research and experimentation done within our centers of excellence. We hope that our experiences benefit the community, and we are always open to exchanging notes with peers, partners, and customers to make collective progress. So today's topic is about a different way to acquire analytics capability within your organization. We have seen some companies trying to build analytic capabilities on their own, while others are using innovative ways to sort of buy or borrow the capabilities. So Manish and I thought that we'll share a point of view on how customers can go about identifying situations where you can perhaps take advantage of such options within your company. So let me start by addressing some challenges facing the data analytics leaders today. So these days, most organizations are sort of seeking data to drive decisions. In fact, a lot of organizations are using sort of data to drive innovation and also sort of gain competitive advantage. But the problems in the industry are sort of well known, right? We know the shortage of talent, the fast changing technology landscape, and the ever growing data sets within the organizations. So in such a situation, we have found sort of leaders facing three critical gaps within their organizations. So first gap essentially is a financing gap. So what is happening is that more dollars within organizations are spent on operations and less basically are available for transformation or sort of growing your business, if you will. So by some accounts, almost like 60 to 70% of the dollars get spent on cost to run the operations as opposed to cost to sort of grow or transform the operations. And of course, in today's economy, a lot of organizations are having severe sort of cash flow issues, which is even sort of compounding the pressures on capital projects. The second gap is essentially a service gap. So the expectations of users are increasing frequently. So earlier in the summer, I bought a bunch of bicycles for my family, right? And so I was trying to look for bikes on different websites, and most of them were sort of out of stock. But there was this one company, Trek, whose website actually allowed me to take a look at real-time inventories within their store locations across the DC metro area. And sure enough, I was able to find store locations where we found the bikes that we wanted, even though most of the stores basically were sort of saying that they are out of stock. So these kinds of experiences are becoming a norm within today's sort of online e-commerce world. And then the third gap essentially is a capability gap, right? So businesses are no longer satisfied with reports and business intelligence. They are looking to sort of blur the lines between transaction systems and data analytics systems and find ways to sort of embed insights back into the transactional system so that you can take more autonomous actions on your sort of business operations. So this obviously is creating a demand for new set of capabilities such as AI and machine learning. Next slide, Catherine. So if you sort of look at the organizations that are trying to build the analytics capabilities themselves, there are essentially 4 challenges that we are sort of observing. So first, I think, is that there is this constant dilemma of like, where should leaders and key resources and teams focus on, right? So we all have sort of seen that notion that, the urgent sort of always triumphs the important. And this actually is causing a lot of challenges in sort of acquiring new capabilities within organizations. The second challenge is about talent retention. So even if you are able to find talent in today's market and sort of gain it, right? Let's say if you were to look at AI machine learning sort of talent, right? It'll be very hard for you to retain it because those people want to actually work on new and different problems sort of like, every month, right? You cannot basically ask them to work on the same things over and over again. The third challenge essentially is for customers basically where there are enterprise capabilities, right? And this is sort of the classic challenge between control versus coordination. So a lot of people actually want to build the capabilities themselves because they feel like, they can control the outcomes more effectively. But I think like perhaps like, if they were to focus more on coordination, they can still sort of like, outsource the capabilities and be able to achieve sort of similar outcomes, right? So that sort of is another sort of challenge. And the last one, of course, is about a mindset challenge, right? So how do you make sure that your leadership, your people within IT teams, are open to basically, outsourcing some of the capabilities, right? Because a lot of times people sort of have pride of ownership and they want to actually build it themselves. So those essentially are sort of 4 challenges that we have seen consistently within organizations. So what are sort of the opportunities that exist, right? So what we have seen is that there are certain situations where organizations basically like, companies that are innovating, are adopting these sort of models, right? So the first one is around experimentation. So I think like, customers basically who are looking to embrace basically AI machine learning, what I've found is that, they are essentially outsourcing the experimentation portion of their business requirements to basically, niche or boutique companies that basically have that talent, right? So for example, I think like, for one of our customers at PetSmart, they actually had asked basically a very small team from within InfoCepts to help them basically with customer propensity to buy kind of model, right? So we sort of built an algorithm for them. We demonstrate that to them. And I think using that, like they were able to decide whether they actually want to invest in that capability or not. So I think there may be opportunities like that within your organizations where you can see that instead of trying to automatically say, okay, I want to build these capabilities myself, you can perhaps actually like, borrow capabilities that exist. And if it works, then you can sort of insource that. The second opportunity is for turnkey automations. So I think, we have seen like customers where there is a lot of automation debt within their business intelligence platforms. And so even I think the vendors basically who are responsible for those platforms are sometimes not able to address the automation debt because they are still sort of like subject to the same observation, right? That they actually focus on more urgent operational issues as opposed to thinking about automation for the future. So that's another opportunity where if you're able to maintain a backlog of areas where you want to automate your BI sort of delivery life cycle, you can actually use other companies to quickly actually build the automation suites and free up sort of your operational dollars. And in each one of them, I think we'll give examples as we sort of unfold the story for you. And the last one is essentially sort of this concept of insights as a service, right? So if you happen to have basically scenarios where the same kind of insight or same kind of reporting is being generated on a regular basis, then instead of trying to build that capability yourself, you can consider sort of outsourcing that using this notion called insights as a service. And sort of I'll give an example later in sort of the presentation. So with that, I think let's roll basically the poll. I'm sort of curious to see what opportunities do you sort of see within your organizations to improve managed analytics experience within your organizations. As you can see, I think between soft skills and hard skills, I think most of them I think are soft skills that we feel matter. So I'm curious to know what the audience basically responds. Okay, let's see the results. So interesting. So I think it's not. I'm not surprised that majority of the people are looking at agility, given I think that the digital transformation initiatives have been accelerated in today's economy. That most of the organizations are looking at agility and how they can basically rapidly respond to the scenarios. So sort of is consistent with what I was expecting. So I think with that, I'll turn it over to Manish, who has developed basically a model that will allow you to sort of demystify when to use sort of, or what these models really mean.
Thanks, Subhash. As Subhash mentioned, I'll start by reiterating and repeating the gaps that he mentioned and the opportunities that represent. So that will set the context for this slide. So the gaps that we are trying to address through managed analytics as service are service gaps, capability gaps, and finance gaps. And the opportunities that we are trying to capitalize on are experimentation, insights as service, and automation. So like any other IT services managed services model, managed analytics model has also evolved over time, though a little bit faster in comparison. To simplify and understand, let's try to analyze it across two dimensions. So let's take first dimension as shared ownership, which is willingness that you have to share the control with your implementation partner. And the next dimension could be the value that you are delivering to your business. And since for analytics, agility and velocity are kind of closely related to value, let's consider agility that most of you have answered on the value dimension. Now, if we look at different layers for analytics as a function within an enterprise, so typically the business decisions are taken on top of analytics capability that you have built in the organization, and those require set of insights which come from your data analytics investments. Now, to come to those insights, what you try to do is you try to implement a number of initiatives in terms of projects, and to execute those projects, you need those data analytics skills. Now, if we look at this model and we try to say that an enterprise is trying to build all of that in-house, then that would be a pure in-house model, right? Now, an important point to note over here is that while one should try to in-source decisions, they should explore outsourcing the outcomes. So the outcomes in this case, or in case of managed analytics, could be a project, which is an initiative, or it could be insights, or a function, or it could be a capability. Now, moving forward, depending on how much control you are willing to share, as I mentioned earlier, you could think of other models, like Catherine, if we move forward. So, like traditional IT services model, if you are just looking for skills to be outsourced, and you want the control for the project, or the insights or the capability to remain within your enterprise, then that would be the traditional managed resources model, or the staff org model that we typically see in IT services model too. Now, as things mature, and you are willing to share the data analytics initiatives and completely outsource it with important decisions being lying with be there with your implementation partner, like the architecture or the design or decisions such as build and buy, that would become more like a managed product, where your implementation partner is actually managing the outcome of that particular project. So this also closely aligns with the traditional IT services model. Now, after this, because analytics is fundamentally different from IT services, this is where you can think of two more models, which I'm going to talk about in a short while. So the next one could be a managed function model. So here, the concept, or what we are trying to suggest over here, is that in addition to projects, you can move one step further, and you can say that you can completely outsource the insights that are needed to support your capabilities. So that would become a managed function model. So you would have an outsourcing partner, which should be able to support all the analytics need that you have to support a particular capability. Now, you can move one step further and also outsource a particular capability. So think of something like a supply chain analytics that you can outsource to a particular implementation partner, and they could take care of whatever number of projects need to be executed, or whatever insights are needed to run that particular business function, and you are only responsible for taking the business decisions. So as you move in this diagram along x-axis, or the value axis, as you delegate more and more control and share more and more control with your implementation partner, you will not only be able to deliver more value to your business users, but also do it faster, better, and cheaper. Is what we have observed, and what we think works. So let's move on. We would just like to talk about couple of examples. Actually, three of them. The first one is a managed project as a service, where I'm going to talk about a recent implementation that we did for Capri Holdings, which is most of you would know is also known as Michael Kors, one of the leading fashion brands, which owns labels such as Michael Kors, Versace, and Jimmy Choo. They have been growing aggressively. They have recently acquired these brands that I talked about, and with this acquisition comes its fair share of challenges in terms of technical debt and diverse technology stack. Now, they do have an aggressive modernization roadmap, but because of the technical debt, they face significant challenges in implementing those modernization plans. Now, let's relate it to what we discussed earlier. So of the three gaps that we talked about, so in a particular case, they wanted to provide their warehouse business users a real-time insight into their warehouse transactions, their omni-channel transactions, and workforce allocation. Now, obviously, with all this diversity, it was very difficult for them to come up with the design or define the architecture and go to an implementation partner only for the implementation. Right? So to address that, they engaged with us, And we try to deliver this turnkey automation in a managed project model, where we were responsible for defining architecture, selecting the technology, and also taking important decisions such as build versus buy. And since we were interested with this decision, we decided that instead of buying any available off-the-shelf products like Unity or HVRs of the world, we are going to build a custom CDC solution grounds up. Right now, our decision kind of paid off, and compared to the leading CDC product, we were able to create that custom solution which powered this automation. And compared to this leading product, we were able to save $1.87 million just in the licensing cost. Now, this does not include the other tangible benefits that this engagement model brought. But the point that I'm trying to make over here is that we address this gap in services that Michael Core was facing in this managed project model, where we were responsible for more important things like architecture, design, and other important decision. If we had to execute this project like in a staff aug mode, this project would have been more error prone and would have taken much more longer, and obviously would have costed much more. So this was one example. Now the next example is managed function as a service, and I would let Subhash talk through that.
Thank you, Manish. So, so in this, the second example, I think, is about this global organization that essentially is in the business of acquiring, data about how consumers sort of watch, media, as well as buy, packaged goods. And essentially, I think, they are in the business of monetizing this data. So it's a global organization, doing business in 100+ countries. Covering probably about 90% of people who are either watching or buying products, right? So it's a pretty massive operation. And so in this company, there is sort of new leadership, and even before sort of the COVID situation had come in, the company has sort of declared publicly, right, that they want to embrace essentially digital transformation completely, right? They want to essentially declare their company as a technology-focused sort of organization and bring relentless change within their organization, right? So all of the leadership essentially is focused on agility, about how can you provide better or newer products based in the market, given the changing sort of consumption landscape, as well as making sure that all of the product portfolios essentially are able to report P&L, since I think improving basically the operations basically was also a focus within this organization. So I think as part of that, clearly I think a variety of leaders that we are interacting with started basically sharing their challenges with us, and I wanted to just explore sort of 2 or 3 with them at a very, very high level, right? So these are all I think operations at scale. So I think one of the service that this company offers to all of its customers, such as the Coca-Colas and the McDonald's of the world, essentially is about how consumers essentially are buying, right? So what they do essentially is provide these customers syndicated reports on a monthly basis, and you may not sort of believe that that there is a team basically of 2,000 FTEs from a large system integrator that essentially is just producing these reports on a manual basis, every month, right? So the reports get generated from the system, but the commentary that the analysts basically have to produce to make sure that these reports can be consumed by the customers is essentially a manual process. So they essentially had approached us. I'm not talking about the customer had approached us, despite basically this large company sort of doing the managed services work for them, to see if we can find a solution, because again, their teams were very busy facing with operational challenges. So we were actually able to build a proof of concept, where essentially the commentary on these reports was being generated using automated insights on an automated basis, and essentially we were able to demonstrate 80% reduction in sort of storytelling costs to the customer in this pilot. And so they are sort of super excited, and now they are sort of exploring what are the possibilities of sort of scaling that kind of automation within their business, which I'm sure will be a challenge in its own. But at least I think like they have experimented with that sort of the art of the possible. The second one, of course, is again like the same notion. They're also facing these the IT costs basically keep going up. The more basically reports they produce, the more basically the operation costs are going up, right? So one example is that they have like hundreds and thousands of reports basically in MicroStrategy, and again this large provider essentially have a team of 9 FTEs who are just basically manually testing the reports after every release, and even that testing is not really guaranteed testing, right? Because they're essentially using sampling to identify a few reports and then just test it and then declare that, okay, this release essentially passes the quality assurance test, right? So again, the customers of approached us, and we were able to build a proof of concept using UiPath. We built a robotic process automation solution where essentially we were able to guarantee basically that all the tests will be executed and cut down basically the number of people from 8 to 3 or 9 to 3 and also make sure that the skill sets of the people that are in the team actually have also been upgraded, because they are the people who are actually able to write RPA code as opposed to actually just going through the manual sort of testing use cases. And then more recently, I think they have approached us with a similar challenge in their data factory, where they're running into challenges with optimizing their the operations to actually generate, to collect the data, cleanse the data, and make it ready so that they can actually monetize it, right? So there again, like, a team, basically a very large team from the system integrator is working, and the customer is asking us to see if we can build a POC for them using sort of a digital twin concept, a digital worker kind of concept. And so we're very excited to sort of work with them, right? The point I'm making is that, these are scenarios where the customer essentially is not trying to solve these problems themselves. They're focused on their operations. They're not letting their core team shift their focus, and instead relying on a partner to help them basically experiment. And if some of these experiments are successful, then they can figure out like how they can operate at scale. So that basically is one way in which companies are trying to reduce their operational costs while still basically keeping an eye on the future. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Manish for the flagship customer case study for this webinar.
Sure. So this final case study is again a managed outcome, and it has all the characteristics and all the gaps that Subhash kind of highlighted at beginning of the presentation. So the customer in this case is Stein Mart, which used to be one of the leading discount fashion retailers with close to 300 stores across US. And since it was in a tough business domain of discount retailing, they had a sharp focus on cost control, and that was kind of also evident in their IT strategy, which was getting most out of every dollar spent. Now, as you can imagine, with such a tight focus on cost control, they had a lean IT business, but full-fledged IT operations, typical of a large retailer. So this kind of created a lot of capability gaps in their internal IT team. And when they were trying to address a potential non-compliance risk due to existing inability to audit their key finance reports, which kind of fed SEC filings, they had to turn over to InfoCepts to kind of deliver a turnkey automation that would help them audit their MicroStrategy reports. And this was something which was not heard of as a solution in 2018. I mean, you can buy audit solutions off the shelf and then create an audit workflow, but to audit contents of a BI reports and also ensure the custody and ability to analyze that was something which was not available. So once again, we kind of executed this project in a managed outcome. So the only requirement that we had from customer, and then we'll hear from Himanshu's video message also, was the fact that they wanted to create an audit workflow that could audit their MicroStrategy development process. Now, we kind of took again all the major decisions, whether it was build versus buy, or it was the architecture or the design, and also the timeline and the timeline in which this kind of initiative could be implemented. Now we had complete flexibility with defining which technology to choose to work with, and in this case we decided to go with MicroStrategy itself. So creating a MicroStrategy audit framework using MicroStrategy itself was again one of the innovations that we brought to the table, which in traditional models would not have been possible. So this once again we were able to finish this and deliver within the timelines. Kind of very cost-effective solution, meeting checking all the boxes that customers was expecting in this case, right? So if we would have tried to execute this in traditional model, so it would not have been possible because of significant capability gaps that the internal Stein Mart team had. And second, if we try to go with a buy kind of solution and turn, then it would have been a significant cost, right? So with this, let's hear more from Himanshu, who's VP of Application at Stein Mart, on his experiences with this engagement model. So let's play a short video message from Himanshu.
What prompted you to think differently and try a managed capability outcome versus a roles-based engagement model?
So the problems we had to solve were fairly complex. We had business problems to solve, and more than we had resources in-house to go after them. So the managed services give us the ability to come after complex problems, and having an all-inclusive team, including architects, infrastructure, and problem-solving teams that can go against a problem without significant investment on our side. The other thing that we had was the diversity of thoughts when we give a problem solving to a third party is interesting by itself, because it takes us outside the conventional thinking process that the company gets ingrained into, and the ideas are more exotic, and very often we get an outcome that's beyond what we were initially planning, but at the end of the day, the business outcome doesn't get met. The other thing that we like about that model is it's a fixed outcome on a fixed budget and a fixed timeline, so it's very predictable for us. Who doesn't like predictability in the business?
How was managing this engagement at Stein Mart different from your typical T&M and fixed cost engagements?
Yeah, one of the thing that you have with T&M model is you have your internal overhead. You have staff monitoring the work, you have people tracking hours, you have all these activities that happen above and beyond solving a business problem. So by going fixed model, we were able to offset that cost and hand it over to InfoCepts to go and solve for us. The other thing that we had was we were able to give the technical team, which in this case was InfoCepts, the ability to partner directly with our business and go ahead and create concepts that were very closely aligned to our business thinking versus having a significant amount of IT influence on it. So the concept came out closer to the expectation of the business. The other thing is we were not concerned about availability of skills. Companies like Stein Mart are often involved in day-to-day operations, right? So we have to go and figure out how to run the stores, how to fix problems that happen across the company. And we also have a series of key initiatives that we have to go after. But in this scenario, we don't have to worry whether that resource that's working on that fixed outcome is going to get pulled for other work.
What are the top 3 benefits that you experience with the managed outcome engagement model compared to the roles-based model?
So on surface, a managed capability model doesn't appear to be cheap. But by the time you compare this to an internal project and you see the overhead that you have internally and the amount of back and forth you have between internal IT and a series of resources and business, the cost is significantly higher. So we have achieved up to 50% saving in costs by going that route. The other thing that we have been able to do is we've been able to get very key talents that typically we would not have in-house. An example was we were not SOX compliant with the business process. And the typical internal thought was, let's just walk away from the tool that we're using because it's making our life very complex. But when we brought this team, the managed services team together, they came in with a couple of concepts that were outside the box. They came in with a solution that we actually are very proud of. They automated all the development cycle and all the deployment cycle within MicroStrategy. And that put us back in a compliant state for SOX. Little problems like that would have been very expensive. Changing a tool would have been very expensive. Retraining people on a tool would have been very expensive. But in this case, just because we gave it to a third party, they were able to create a very good concept and they were able to make us achieve that goal with a fraction of the cost we're looking at. The other thing is having the same thing doing managed services and managed capability for us was very important. There was a very smooth transition between the creation of the outcome and taking that outcome and rolling it back in a day-to-day support model, right? So we are very proud that within a few days, the development team completed the work, give us a warranty cycle, but at the end of the warranty cycle, the regular team that's running the system for us was able to take up the product and maintain it for us on the long run without further assistance from the solution team.
So Subhash, you asked about the options that we had at Stein Mart. So I just wanted to play this video and then talk about that. So one of the options that was actually considered was to move away from MicroStrategy to some more workflow friendly kind of BI solution. And as Himanshu categorically mentioned, that it would have been a very difficult journey. So with this, I would pass on to you, Subhash, for closing the session and talking about the outcomes here.
Thank you. Thank you for rolling the poll. So I guess you're interested in looking at what are some of the barriers that you likely will see within your organization or within your customer organizations to adopt or embrace basically managed capability kind of models. And there are 5 options. Again, all of them are mostly, I think, soft skills. Okay, let's roll the poll. I'm curious to see, I think, what the results would be. Could we close the poll? Wow. So 75% of the participants feel, I think, that the nature of the business does not allow such a model. So I can understand, I think, if you are in a regulated business, such as in public sector, federal government, or even I think companies trying to comply with government regulations, that there may be some constraints. But even then, we feel, I think, that there is an opportunity to think differently. But it's interesting, I think, that 3/4 of the folks feel, I think, that the business will not allow such a model. Partner lock-in, of course, that's going to be a challenge. We can sort of there are ways to sort of address that, and if there's interest, we can sort of talk about that in detail. So with that, I think let's bring closure. So last slide.
My personal take is, Subhash, is that more than anything, it requires a trigger for the change. And as we talked about this case study about either the Michael Core or the Stein Mart, it was a trigger, something, a problem that was not faced earlier, that kind of triggered that change in thought process, and then everything kind of fell in place.
Yeah.
I would say more than anything, it's like the trigger. Okay.
Yeah. So I know we are a little bit sort of over, so I think I will just sort of wrap this thing up. So I think so. Of course, this sort of slide was our attempt to provide you some characteristics, basically, that you can use to evaluate under which scenario you can use sort of which model. So of course, like we didn't really talk about, sort of augmenting your teams, with complementary skill sets. But this is an area where, I think perhaps the concept basically of using managed resource service is probably like underappreciated. We have basically customers who are dealing with lots of niche technologies within their enterprise ecosystem. And what we have found is that repeatedly when customers try to build capabilities in-house, they are better suited to actually build generalists within their organization and find ways to basically get best-in-class expertise from other companies. And so I think there are opportunities for businesses to consider basically how they can get access to experts sort of on demand. When we talked about, I think, Michael Kors, Stein Mart, sort of the consumer data insights organization that I talked about, all of them basically are using sort of one of these models, right? Either fixed cost, turnkey initiatives, or innovative implementations. So I think, instead of going through the details, I'll simply provide you, I think, a couple of things to sort of think about, right? So one is that you can ask the question that is analytics core to your business? Are you in the business basically of, monetizing data or delivering analytics, or is analytics essentially just enabling your organization? If it is enabling your organization, then I think you have more opportunity to actually, use one of these models as opposed to falling into the trap of convincing yourself that you have to build the capability yourself, because it will take time for you to sort of grow that, mature that, and be able to realize sort of the results. The second thing I think from a leadership perspective that you can sort of ask the question is that, would you rather basically spend more time consuming insights and making decisions and sort of advancing your business strategy, or more time essentially trying to build the capability that will ultimately, I think, give you the same insights that will inform your business strategy just at a very delayed interval. So I think with that, I will close this sort of presentation, and hope you found this useful, and we're willing to take a few questions. So.
Okay, yeah. So thanks for the info, guys. But we do have a few questions, and we've got plenty of time to get through some of them here. So Manish, I think I'll direct this one to you. Can you explain again the difference between managed as a capability and managed as an outcome?
Sure. So as I explained in that slide with graphic, so you can look at whether you are executing a project, or you are implementing a function, or you're implementing a capability. All those are different types of outcomes, right? Now we do recommend that enterprises should be more focused on making decisions rather than managing these outcomes. Now the real difference between these models is essentially the level of control that you are willing to share with your implementation partner, right? So as you move from a project to a function to capability, that's more about how much liberty or how much freedom you want to give to your implementation partner to make those important decisions related to design, implement architecture, or build versus buy decisions, right? So it's more about sharing the control with your implementation partner than anything else.
Okay, so this one I'm gonna send over to you, Subhash, just for another a brief explanation. How is the managed analytics model different from the managed IT model?
Yeah, so I think in the managed IT model, I think, right, like most of the organizations were looking at outsourcing sort of what I would call as support kind of functions to sort of like, the global outsourcing companies. So I would say that they were probably trying to address more of the service gap and the finance gap, right? In the managed capability, in the managed analytics model, we feel, I think, that there's going to be a fundamental shift, right? Like, people will actually start outsourcing because they want to get access to higher end capabilities that are just not available within their organizations. So if you look at, I think, analytics solutions, it requires more, I think, cross-functional skills than a typical, say, an app modernization project, right? So you need basically people who understand the data, people who understand the business domain, people who understand, different technologies, and of course, they have the IT knowledge to be able to bring it together. So I think the level of complexity in terms of skill sets required is at a different order of magnitude compared to a managed IT model.
Would the managed capability create dependency on the partner?
Yeah, I think we were just sort of talking about that earlier, in the presentation. So yes, I think there is going to be a transition in risk, right? Because if analytics is core to your business and you start relying on a partner, then I think there is a chance that you might be too dependent on them, right? But I think rather than trying to use that to not sort of engage in that direction, I would again invite you to use the model or the framework I talked about, right? That is analytics core or not, so you can sort of use that kind of decision-making grid. And then second is like when you undertake that initiative, you can still come up with favorable contractual terms to make sure that there is sufficient knowledge transfer, transition in clauses baked into your agreements that can include like joint ownership of IP. It can include like transfer of like key resources once at a specific duration, or basically making sure that the partners are committed to sort of fully doing the knowledge transfer of a larger scale projects. So I think those strategies are sort of tried and tested across other managed services models, and I think that the same things can be brought in the managed analytics model as well.
Okay, and this one's kind of a multi-part question and revolves around pretty much the entire webinar that we've had today. I want to see if you can maybe either of you or both of you can kind of sum it up successfully. We're all aware that there's just simply, there's too many tasks in the organization now to manage all of the DNA services. And so the question is, how do you close the gap? Do you spend more time building the DNA capabilities or more time consuming insights? And in response to that, how do you decide?
So, I mean, I can take a crack at it, Manish, and you can sort of chime in. So again, sure. I think like I think the reason why basically we wanted to put this model in place and some of the decision-making criteria is right because what we are trying to convey is that there is no right or wrong model, right? So I think like we're not trying to advocate one over the other. I think like it's not like a progression that once you move to the right, like you can't go back to the left. That's not what we're suggesting. I think ultimately what you have to do is find out like what your current situation is. How quickly are you looking to make progress within the organization, and then decide basically like that would you rather rent something, try it out, or whether you feel like compelled to sort of like buy it because that's going to be inherent to I think like how you're going to run your business, right? So I think outside of the approach that we talked about, that's just my response. That like we have to evaluate I think a particular situation, and within the same organization, I think like we may actually have multiple models be perfectly fine.
Okay, and if either of you guys knew this or aware of it, Himanshu, when he was in the video there, he mentioned a fixed budget and a fixed timeline. Is that kind of a challenging undertaking in and of itself? I mean, how do you propose the budget and timeline to those that might actually control the budget if it's beyond the folks in the DNA function?
Manish, you want to take this? Or you want me to take it?
So let me understand the question. So this one, the engagement that we had done with Stein Mart was a managed outcome. So the requirement statement was simply like one-liner that we have to come up with a certain outcome. Right now, at that point, what kind of resources would be required to provide that function, that outcome, was simply not known. Right, and that is the situation where there needs to be a trust factor between the enterprise and their implementation partner, which fortunately in case of Stein Mart and InfoCepts we had. So we had to as Subhash mentioned, we had to understand the gap, come up with a lightweight proof of concept, and then use that to come up with guidance numbers on what would it take in terms of timeline and investment to provide this outcome. And that was something that Stein Mart kind of agreed upon. So I would say there is no fixed formula to define a budget and timeline for managed outcome or managed capabilities. And that's why it's important that there is element of trust between the implementation partner and the enterprise. And it would depend on individual outcomes and initiatives.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add to what Manish mentioned, I think, is that in terms of the business relationship, right? So I think there are two ways in which it can be done, right? You can either provide basically like, a statement of work to an organization and say, okay, hey, these are the 10 requirements that I have, and you shall do them basically using such and such kind of approach, right? So that is where I think like, the customers are sort of providing like, specific approaches or requirements of that the vendor needs to sort of adhere to, right? The other approach essentially is to provide a statement of objectives where you are simply trying to convey, right, at the time of buying the service, that these are basically our objectives, and then let basically the vendor give basically their approach, including preparing basically a statement of work, which then essentially, brings you to the same spot in terms of the buying journey, right? So ultimately, I think like, when you sign the contract, you actually have the same level of clarity between both parties. It's just that, in one, I think like, the vendor basically has more freedom to execute as long as they're able to deliver the results to that objective. So that's the only thing that I would convey.
All right. So kind of as a follow-up to that, what advice do you have to change the perspectives within an organization if that needs to occur?
I can take first crack at it, and then Subhash, you can add. So I would say that mostly, I mean, as we noted in the poll, people do think that the nature of their business would not allow success of such a model. So I think it's very important to understand where the resistance is coming from. I can bet that almost all the enterprises that I have worked with, they have shared that they lack either the capability, or they are not able to provide the services, or they are facing constraints with their budget, right? So I would try to find out the gaps. I would suggest finding out the resistance, and then try to find out a small initiative where something like this can be experimented, right? And it could be an automation, or it could be an insight as a service, or and then use that to kind of show small steps towards success, and then use that to build consensus within the enterprise. So like any other initiative or any new change, the path is pretty straightforward. Try to understand source of resistance, find out an opportunity, demonstrate success, and then build on that success.
Okay, so I think that's I think we're all set. I think that's going to do it for the questions now. You guys, you all set with that? You wrapped up with what we're going to share today with the folks in attendance? Yep,
I think this was great. Thank you everyone for joining and for all the great questions.
Okay, that was great. No, thank you so much, Subhash and Manish. That was fantastic insight about the ways that you can use managed analytics to stay ahead of the curve and the competition, obviously. And particularly liked how you broke down the differences between a managed analytics model and managed IT. So, okay, everybody, we're going to make this webinar available in the on-demand platform. So feel free to share this with your colleagues so they can take advantage of the content presented today. And that's going to do it for this session today. And we really look forward to seeing all of you again for the 4th installment of the InfoCepts webinar series. So, okay, have a great week, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.